Trains can be fast and they can be frequent, but can they be both? Canada is planning a new rail line, maybe, between the largest cities in the country. And the whole process has frankly been a mess, with not nearly enough transparency about what we're trying to achieve and how we actually think we might get there. Fortunately, there's a lot to learn here, and it goes far beyond just Canada. So I'm going to do a bit of a series over the next little while on the realities of high-speed rail. One of the biggest issues in this entire discourse has been commentators and indeed politicians talking about high-frequency rail like that was some well-understood standard that existed around the world. There are tram systems where lots of trams running on rails operate at high frequency. Is this high-frequency rail? Even more frustrating, though, has been the continual insistence, including from purported experts, that Canada has two choices: high-frequency rail and high-speed rail, and that they are mutually exclusive. That just does not reflect the reality of high-speed rail as it exists in the world today. So let's talk about speed, frequency, and why we can have both. Hey there, my name is Reece, and I make videos about public transit, rail transportation, and cities. If you enjoy this video, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Let's start by getting the worst part of this out of the way. Rail can be frequent no matter the speed. To understand why, it helps to understand what determines frequency. When trains are running on a line, they need some buffer space so that if one train slams on the brakes, the others behind it can as well without slamming into each other. And at the extreme end, this is usually what limits how frequently services on a line can run. Trains running closer together pass any given point on a line more frequently. So things like advanced CBTC signaling systems that can do things like calculate precise stopping distances based on train characteristics, track conditions, and real-time speed allow for higher frequencies and smaller stopping distances. Now, to be clear, the gaps between trains needed on a high-speed railway are a lot longer than on a subway line, because trains traveling faster need more time, i.e. distance, to stop. Fortunately though, the practical distance between the trains ends up being the same in terms of time because the trains are going so fast. While subway trains, while traveling at a typical subway speed, will be about half a kilometer apart when they're operating 5 minutes apart, high-speed trains could be as far as 5 kilometers apart. And you can see this on display in, for example, Japan, where multiple parts of the bullet train network have trains that operate just minutes apart. This is fundamentally a lot like a subway, but with much more complex engineering and planning because high-speed trains are big, usually. You can actually sit at Tokyo Station and watch as bullet trains come in and out of the station every couple of minutes, which is incredibly impressive. What's even more impressive is that all of this happens with just 2 island platforms headed north and just 3 headed southwest, and no through running at all. You can learn more in my Japanese high-speed rail video. Now, of course, Japan running high-speed trains every 3 or 4 minutes is not the norm for high-speed rail around the world, but nor is a train every 2 hours. It's pretty common to see trains every 30 or 15 or even 10 minutes. And you might argue that since high-speed railways, being new railways, tend to be all double track with high-quality signaling and separation from slower traffic, they can actually operate higher frequencies than most railways. And since they can move huge trains, 16 cars in the case of most bullet trains or the Eurostar between France and Britain, and at high speeds, they can actually move more people than most railways as well. So then why did Canada decide to use the term high-frequency rail, a term which, as I discussed in a CBC video with Paige Saunders, isn't really used internationally? Well, it helps to note that speed and frequency are not factors that are generally in conflict on any kind of rail system. Generally, any high-speed rail line, as I mentioned before, is going to have 2 tracks, and so the only real limit to its frequency is how many trains you decide to run on them. However, while most high-speed lines are high frequency, not every high-frequency line is high speed, which is obvious if you've ever gone down into your local subway system and seen trains operating at high frequency. Of course, you do need some baseline of track space to operate a basic train service, which is why Canada, with its freight rail overlords, struggles so much to provide a reliable or semi-frequent train service today. But once you have dedicated tracks, frequency is mostly a choice, including cutting it back. What the Canadian government seems to really be going for is frequent, low speed, which is a real option. But pretending that high speed implies infrequent, well, that's just not true. What's funny too is that frequency is relative. High frequency rail for Canada seems like it might only mean a train every hour, and maybe in an amazing world every half hour, whereas in Japan it's every couple of minutes. Ironically, that means that if the government's plans are built, not only will our trains be slower than Japan's, but they will also be high-frequency trains that are less frequent. The potential cause for the use of the high-frequency rail term, I think, is that the actual idea that public transit frequency is good has disseminated enough into the public sphere that it seems like a good brand for a rail service. On one hand, it's good that people recognize that frequent is good, but on the other hand, frequent is a terrible marketing term because what does that even mean? The mistake we make, though, is assuming that speed and frequency aren't positively correlated. The reason bullet trains in Japan can justify running so frequently, which is really expensive, not only in operators but also on maintenance for those rails, is that they are super busy. In the first quarter of 2023, Via Rail across its entire Canada-wide network moved 450,000 people. The busiest bullet train line in Japan moved that many people in just 2 days. Indeed, around the world, the busiest corridors, high speed or not, are basically always frequent to meet demand. So by being faster, i.e. high-speed rail, and providing a competitive trip option, you actually drive the demand that means that frequency is high and stays high. Ultimately, Canadians are being given a false choice. Almost any rail line can be operated at high frequency if demand justifies it. Once you have sufficient track capacity, frequency is mainly just an operational matter. But you can't just decide overnight that you're going to run fast trains on your slow line, because speed is dependent on the physical infrastructure. So any railway with sufficient capacity can be high frequency, but not any railway can be high speed. It needs to be purpose-built. Ironically, given the government's direction, the best way to provide a long-term high-frequency rail service for Canada is by providing a rail service that people actually want to use. Remember, Canada used to have a lot more rail service than it does today, but other options have emerged and rail service has also been cut back. If we build a high-speed rail option that is competitive with driving and flying, that option is always going to have quite a bit of demand, and it means it's always going to have quite a lot of frequency, no matter what government is in Ottawa. Now, what people might say is that high-speed rail is expensive, so I'm going to address the problem of cost in my next video. Thanks for watching.